So I want to start off by just giving you a summary from one of these individuals who's well known to all of us, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence to discern the truth from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction." He also said the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. And I like this as a starting point because it allows us to really imbibe what education on a broader level means. So when we get into what environmental justice is all about, on another level, we need to talk to this issue from the perspective of education. In 2021, I joined forces with Sustainable Hudson Valley and Melissa Everett to embark on a project, or to partner with them on a project, the Regional Climate Action Strategy for the Hudson Valley. This strategy encompassed a number of areas, and what was convened as a result of it, there were several working groups, of which one was mine, or I was asked to facilitate dialogue with a number of stakeholders around issues of environmental justice. But I want to just let you know that this issue, or this particular project, is a project that was long time in the making. This is not something, I got on the project in 2021 in February, but this has been ongoing. I know herself and Pat Pomeroy, one of her co-conspirators, have been working at this for I don't know how long, Melissa. I mean, you have been at this for a while. So I just came along as kind of the tag-along partner to work on environmental justice issues. One of the project itself, as you see on the screen, was kind of broken out into two parts, or two sections. The rapidly scaling solution sections, which Melissa mentioned a short while ago, issues of water, which was talked about, materials management, transportation, and so on. And that's very specific. There are some technologies that can be deployed under the CLCPA and in other ways that will help with the transfer of this kind of technologies into society. But then there's also this community aspect, the community, securing the community benefits. This is more problematic because, as you've heard, it involves a number of interconnecting, very deep, complex interconnecting issues, which also include things like religion, things like spirituality, things like just how you understand culture and ethnicity. So it's very, very loaded. My piece was focused on environmental justice. So in order to do that, what we decided to do, what we tried to do, kind of big picture, is we developed a methodology where we would look at some environmental and socioeconomic indicators in potential EJ communities across the Hudson Valley. We actually looked at 7 counties, and all of the data that we generated really is preliminary. It provides an avenue for much, much deeper research, but clearly it was able to help us kind of tease out some important aspects of environmental justice in the Hudson Valley. We looked at these indicators, tried to identify key indicators that we could use to build stories around communities. And you've heard the stories of Newburgh and what's going on with the PFAS study, and the individuals that are involved and engaged in that work, and the people who are most affected by that work. Those are the stories that we want to build up. The other thing that we wanted to do was to kind of build a set of a platform or a scaffold to understand who are the players in the region who are doing this kind of work. We wanted to identify networks of individuals and find out whether or not how these individuals and these groups could work together to come up with solutions. In the final analysis, our goal really was to identify local solutions with leverage and connect those local solutions with those state and federal funding opportunities that you heard about a short while ago. So what we did when it comes to the environmental justice aspect of things, we separated out our study. And again, I wanted to preface this by saying this is a preliminary study. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. We separated it into 4 categories: land, air, water, and people. And I'm only going to talk about 2 areas in this particular presentation. There's a lot more that could be spoken about, but I'm only going to focus it on 2. Traffic proximity to communities as it relates to air quality, and people as it relates to education, and STEM education in particular. The reason why I'm so cued into STEM education is not only because of the fact that I'm a chemist, an organic chemist, and I'm passionate about the sciences, but because STEM education in and of itself is one of those other pillars for advocacy. Without this knowledge base and an understanding of not an exorbitant understanding, but without a clear understanding of what STEM subjects do and how they relate to our environment, it's very difficult to convince those people who have control over resources to shift money. So a good example of which is the PFAS study. Well, what is PFAS? If you know what it is and how it affects biological systems, you might have a different argument when it comes to advocating for your rights in a public forum. So I want to talk about that. As we did our work, one of the things that we looked at was the environmental justice screening tool. We used that tool to kind of figure out where the most, and this is really, really very basic analysis, where in some of these communities, of these 7 communities, where are we finding problems with air quality as it relates to where traffic is? And if you identify, or if you see in that area in red, in Poughkeepsie, this is an area that has a higher concentration or higher likelihood of particulate matter in this environment. Well, why is this problematic? Well, it ties us back into STEM education, or education generally. We know air quality is a key indicator in human brain development. And so if you live in an environment where there is high levels of, or high toxicity in the air, choose whatever metric you want to use, whatever compound you want to use, you're going to have problems percolating up in the education system. This becomes important as I kind of move on. This becomes important when we start to make these connections between education and health. An interesting thing came up in Ulster County, up in Kingston, where I live. During COVID, one of the bigger problems that was experienced by the kids who were trying to learn was lack of access to broadband. They did not have access to broadband. So what does that mean? That means that kids who had access to broadband could do work. They could go to school, they could experience, even though it was difficult, they could experience education online. Communities in Midtown of Kingston, it turns out that some of the providers were actually increasing the price of Wi-Fi service in these communities, and at the same time offering decreased prices in other parts of the community. So when you see these things starting to happen, you start to talk about environmental justice, becomes multi-layered. It's not a simple fix. It's not easy to track one thing and track another thing and come up with a solution. It's multi-layered, multifaceted. What I want to do here at this point is I want to kind of break it down, give you some idea of one of the bigger challenges. We looked at the graduation rates of students between 2019 and 2020. And this is a very, very cursory, rudimentary, basic level study. It's just looking at some data that the New York State Department of Education provides and tallying numbers. And we asked the question, how many students were on STEM-related pathways? Were graduating with math and science? And I can tell you of the 7 communities, the numbers look the same. Across the board, at least for public education, the numbers are this bad. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. You can do the math and add up how many, 101 and 64, that's 165 plus 13, that's 170 something students in Poughkeepsie graduating class. And of that graduating class, nobody is focused on math and science. They're doing humanities. I don't have a problem with humanities, my brother. But we have a problem. Yeah, we have a problem if humanities alone is going to help us solve a problem that's rooted in science and technology. And for the people who are most affected by it, if they're not learning the science and technology, hey, where are we going? Not going to happen. We looked at Rhinebeck, which is an interesting case study. So there are a couple of students there, 6 students in, who are Hispanic or Latino, 70 students who are white. 13% of those white students are doing science. None focused on math careers. Here's the drama, or here's the problem, or here's the trick. While the numbers might be low, what Rhinebeck has done, their school district has done, is somehow galvanize their community to produce a center, a foundation called the Rhinebeck Science Foundation. So where the public system, education system has failed in STEM education, an affluent community creates an opportunity through this Rhinebeck Science Foundation to train their kids. Well, we know what happens in Rhinebeck. Rhinebeck is one of the affluent communities, high net worth, high net income, high tax base, professional people, physicians and lawyers and doctors of all sorts, financiers of all sorts, people who understand the connection between the education that their kids are getting, where it's missing, and what they need to provide their community in order that their kids get what they need. 13 kids out of 17, 19% of the graduating class in 2019-2020 have a base or a background in STEM education. What is that telling us? I think the numbers speak for themselves. In Newburgh, zeros. These are, when you see numbers like this, and you could go from county to county to county to county, and you'll see numbers like this spread out all across the county, all across New York. When you see numbers like this and then ask the question, how are you going to train these people to fit the jobs of the future? How is that going to happen? When we talk about issues of medicine and healthcare, who are the healthcare professionals that look like me who are going to be providing services to people who look like me? Where are they going to come from? They're certainly not being trained, and if these are numbers that are true, we have a huge problem for throughput of individuals who are of color and who understand the importance of science and technology in their own safety networks, their communities. Huge, huge problem. I followed up and I did a cursory study. So it turns out that the New York Power Authority, they have a program called the Environmental Justice and Sustainability Project. This is a 2017 report, or the updated report. And what you'll notice, which is interesting, does this thing have a light flasher? Yes. I put a question mark here. This is kind of where Mid-Hudson is. This is Albany here. This is, where is this? This is Albany, and the other one is a place called, I didn't even know about this. This is a place called Belheim in a strange counties. I don't even know how to pronounce this. Can somebody help me? I don't know. How you pronounce? Yeah, you know how to pronounce this well. Good, thank you. So this county, but this is way up. This is way up there. I'm talking about what's happening in Mid-Hudson. This is what our project was about. What's going on in Mid-Hudson? So there are no project, at least the New York Power Authority doesn't have, in 2017, didn't have a project centered on STEM education and environmental justice in the area that I'm most interested in, or the area that we were most interested in. What you can see, though, is that St. Lawrence, which is way up at the top, up here, with a community of the entire county has 13 black students, 13 Latino students, and 902 white students. 4% of those white students, none of the black students, none of the Latino students are doing STEM. 4% of this 902, 10% is 90. So we're looking at upwards of just a little over 40 students are doing STEM education, STEM subjects. Could you pronounce this other word for me, please? Scolari, how is that pronounced? Schoharie, thank you, county. You look at that county, 10% of the white students are doing STEM subjects. There are 2 black students, 2 Latino students. In a population, and white students, 289, 10% of those students are on math or science track. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Yeah. Does this make sense? This pathway, this trajectory does not change from county to county to county. The numbers don't look any different. I'm happy to debate and to argue about whether or not it's right or wrong and what is needed, and I'm also happy to dive deeper so that I can prove myself wrong, that what I'm seeing is not really correct. But the numbers that the New York State Department of Education is providing us is suggesting that STEM education is not a priority for certain people. If that's the case, then all of what we're talking about and providing services, health specifically, healthcare services, with health professions that look like me, it's going to be problematic. I decided to follow this up and just take a look at what's happening, what they talked about in 2020 and 2021. New York State Power Authority, Environmental Justice and Sustainability Report. They talk a lot about exposure of kids to STEM. But the data in the public school system doesn't bear out what these numbers are saying. So 4,000 students got exposure to STEM subjects. 4,000 students got exposure. That doesn't translate to students getting into STEM professions, because there are some other barriers, and the barriers are things like aptitude tests, like your MCAS and your GMATs and all of these aptitude tests that students need to move from one level of education to the next, to move along the economic pathway. These things are missing. So we see numbers like this, and these numbers don't tell the entire story. It's a good number, but it doesn't give us the entire picture. We need to have a way to think about education, STEM education in particular, as it relates to this problem of environmental justice and healthcare. There are issues that are in each community. Let's talk about water, for example, and PFAS in water, or some other contaminant, some heavy metal, things like copper and lead. We know about copper and lead as problems for mental and mental development. We know how these heavy metals affect neurological systems. The question that we have to ask is, who's going to be doing the studies for communities that don't have the professionals or the education that they need? We have to find other solutions. I want to just kind of wrap this up by giving you two more pieces of information. One is, one of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of emerging pictures and strategies, it's clear that in order for us to deal with this issue of environmental justice or environmental injustices, we need to make some connections between desperately different communities. I think the example of the work of Ed Lawson and Professor Bell is on the PFAS study in Newburgh is a model for what needs to be multiplied across the state. The collaboration between academia and community, that's critical. And then an overlap with the issue of education, where STEM education becomes a centerpiece in this puzzle. You can't get to where you want to go without having this kind of interconnectivity. I heard somebody talk about Callaloo and the fact that they had Callaloo and that Callaloo spoiled because they didn't understand how to use or to process or to cook the Callaloo. That's ethnic issues. You bring Callaloo into my house, everybody knows what to do. Believe me, it won't spoil. But other communities don't know. Well, that's a simple process of education, teaching people what they need to know. We're at a state now where making those connections between different communities is going to be pivotal. And I speak to that from the perspective of academia, community activism, politics, government, private sector, other public sector areas that are going to be crucial. STEM education is another key piece, as I'm saying this over and over again, but I want to just highlight two organizations that I've become very more familiar with. Newborn Directions, both of which, Newborn Directions is in Newburgh, or Poughkeepsie, and Mentoring in Medicine, which is a national organization that has its roots in Poughkeepsie as well. These two organizations are doing something that is really, really important. They're getting kids focused on understanding the relationship between their health, their safety, and their education when it comes to issues of science and technology. I'm very interested in these organizations. I'm very passionate about medicine because medicine is a pathway and very important for us to pay attention to. And the last thing I'll just summarize and say is that, whole community strategies, I think Melissa Everett mentioned this, or may have mentioned this, that we need to be looking at systems where the assets that are going to be deployed into a community that change lives and change opportunities are actually owned by the community. So this idea of New York has NY Green Bonds, which is a program out of the New York Power Authority, but it focuses on large investors. There are opportunities for smaller organizations, or at least one that we know of, a place called Calvert Impact Capital, which looks at small community investment into community investment notes. These are the mechanisms by which the technologies that we need in these communities can be deployed, but more importantly, they can be owned by the community themselves. This is a a facet or a pathway to empowerment that I think is really, really necessary. I want to leave you with a couple of books. Now, this is a really, really good book, A Terrible Thing to Waste by Harriet Washington. And I would encourage you, anybody who really wants to understand the relationship between environmental contaminants and health issues, and why it is that in environmental justice communities we need to have scientists present, you need to read this book. You've got to read this book. The other book that I would recommend is Waste by Catherine Coleman Flowers, a colleague of mine. We worked together at Union Theological Seminary, where I did my MDiv degree. She has done an incredible job in bringing light to a problem of sewage, wastewater management in a place called Lyons County, Alabama. That project has galvanized her, put her to the state where she's now the vice chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. You need to know these people. You need to know what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing, what the base is. Those are two individuals, two books that I'd recommend. But all of these books all came out between 2019 and 2021. These are things that we should pay attention to if you really are serious about learning about the challenges that we're facing in communities. The last thing I'll say is this. None of this work is possible without collaboration. And this is just a drop in the bucket of the number of people that we, over the last, since 2021, have been talking to. Melissa Everett is prolific when it comes to getting people organized and talking to each other. This group of individuals, I think is really, really impressive because it demonstrates what it means to have coalition. They're white people, they're black people, they're people from all kinds of different sectors, gender, you name it. This is a mix of people that represents or should represent the possible solution that we want to see happen when it comes to issues of environmental justice. And I just want to lift up two individuals that I came to well, one, Catherine, I know, and I really have come to respect all of her work in wastewater management. The other is Ernest Tolleson. Ernest is the chair of Riverkeeper. And I learned how complex it is from the perspective of somebody looking at just the river. I mean, Riverkeeper is focused on getting the river right, getting the toxins out of the river, making sure that it's safe for us to swim in and to be in and to live in. Ernest has tremendous knowledge about the intersection between issues of environmental injustices and water. And he connects that to the economic models that we're now experiencing or we're in. He's been very, very helpful to me to help me learn the different ways in which these systems are interconnected. And it's somebody that if you ever get an opportunity, I would pick his brains. The last thing I'll say to close off is that there were a number of students from Vassar who were really helpful in getting this project underway. It is still at a gestational stage. It's still in its rudiments. We need resources and whatnot to really build this out. But Neil Curry, Madeleine Pelletier, Liana Tang, Ariana Henry, these are, well, not Neil, but the other three were students who worked with us through Sustainable Hudson Valley on this project. And of course, I want to thank my good friend Melissa Everett and Dave Connor, who worked on the education working group in this overall project. That's all I got. Thank you. Thank you.